put the lake in. Well, many of those people own property over across from the Apple Works up in that
Hey,
area.
Tom, why don't you come down here and speak on the level? We can hear you better.
Okay?
I see all this has got to be recorded now. Is that on microphone?
It doesn't work.
Doesn't working?
It's all right.
Okay.
That was just me talking.
Don't move too much now.
Okay.
I thought I had
Is this
you.
okay?
Yes, this is supposed to be
Anyhow,
documented.
many of the people that own land that was in the bottom of what is now Lamb Lake also own land over there across from the Apple Works. So they'd say, yeah, we'll sell you this 20 acres, but if you want this 20 acres, you gotta buy this 50 acres. So there was land that was off to the east of Lamb Lake. A lot of it didn't have road frontage, that just was sitting. We'd approached, the land family had approached the Nature Conservancy and the Indiana Nature Preserves to see if they were interested in that and in 94 acres up Indian Creek. And it didn't fit either of the criteria from either of those organizations. And I went to a meeting over on Shoreview Drive one night, and this was with Central Indiana Land Trust, and it was for the land that the Bill and Tom Huffam and their families had been working on for a conservation easement, which would be at the back end, it backs up against Locust Grove on the southeast end of Lamb Lake. This is 265 acres. They did not turn over ownership of that land, but they did a conservation easement. Basically, they said, they signed documents that says that that land will never be developed, and there could be some timbering, but it's in agreement with Central Indiana Land Trust. And so that meeting I went to had to do with that, and I met Cliff Chapman there, and I started talking to him. I said, you know, Cliff, we've got land adjacent to that we'd like to do something with. And Dr. Lamb and Bob Huffam both had always wanted to kind of make it preserve back there. So it was able to be worked out, and we just, a month ago, completed our portion, which was right where Roberts Road. Those of you who know how to get into the east end of Lamb Lake, many of you don't. That's Roberts Road. It's on the way to the Apple Works. There's a little place there called Split Acres Farm. There's just a pond right there and a barn, and then across the way is the house. The last acquisition is that very corner. It doesn't include the barn and the pond, but there's a farm field. It includes that. And then Tom and Ann Huffam also added more acreage down at the other end. So that was all done this year. And there's now a total of 695 acres there. And that is all woods. That's all in the watershed of Lamb Lake. And what that means is there's not going to be any development done in that area, which will help keep the water clean coming into Lamb Lake. And we have got, in fact, all of the families are here today that were involved in that. Bill and Tom Huffam, and Randy Lamb, my brother-in-law, and my wife Priscilla Lamb Johnson. And they have owned this land forever and ever, and almost. But that is where the nature preserve is going in, and it is now owned totally by, other than the conservation easement at the back end, the rest of it's owned by Central Indiana Land Trust. And there are some brochures out in the lobby. Each one of those brochures has got information about that preserve and things that they found. They did a bioquiz there this last year, which means that there were professors from all over the state and some from Illinois that came in for a weekend. They stayed over at Camp Atterbury, and then they'd come first thing in the morning and they'd go in, and each one of them was a specialist for different types of animals and such. And they did this bioblitz. They found 2 species that had never been found before back in there. So I mean, it's just, and they were astounded at that preserve. I had walked the preserve a number of times with timber buyers over the years. Randy had been back there probably as a kid. My wife had never been on this land because we've got acreage over closer to Morgantown. But the first time I walked it with Cliff Cliff Chapman with Central Indiana Land Trust. And he started pointing out these boulders that were granite. And he said, this is significant because Indiana's a limestone state. There's no granite in Indiana. This all came from Wisconsin and Minnesota and Canada. So those big boulders that are down there. Well, then I started looking at it in a different way. I mean, this, you know, it made it clear to me why it's flat here in Trafalgar and farm country, and all of a sudden you get into all these ravines. So that really made it interesting, and we wanted to get involved in that. So there are trails back there. The Lamb family put in a trail from the end of Deer Run, a gravel trail that goes back in. And incidentally, you can go take that trail and you'll get to the top of the hill and there's a picnic table. If you go left there, that'll take you over to Huffam Acres to the east end of the lake. So you have that access all the way through, which makes it really quite nice. But that preserve is about 3/4 of an acre. It goes all the way from the east end of Lamb Lake, all the way to the little Brock's convenience store there in Peoga. And it goes all the way from right by the Apple Works, all the way back over to Locust Grove, which is on Spearsville Peoga Road at the end, which is about 1.5 acres, so, or 1.5 miles. So it's really quite an extensive area. But anyhow, be sure to there's some maps out there, and there's also those brochures. And I'm going to put in a little plug for Central Indiana Land Trust. That land has all been acquired. They have money in reserve to maintain it. The trails need updating. There's an envelope in those brochures. If you see fit, put a donation in and send it to them. But it is a lovely area. That is almost in comparison with state parks in Indiana. It's only 45 minutes from downtown Indy. So that's my pitch on the preserve. Now, my other pitch, and did you say that you used some big word about who I was introducing?
A luminary.
A luminary, yes.
Honorable.
Honorable, okay. My brother-in-law, Randy Land, taught in the IPS schools for 40 years and taught, in fact, there's some folks that live down here at Land Lake that were his students early on. And he taught all the natural sciences. And he's fun to be in the woods with because he knows all the birds and all the plants and all the animals. And if he doesn't know them, he'll give you a Latin name so you don't know he doesn't know them. So it's quite enjoyable. And I learned something from him, although I pretend like I didn't learn anything from him. Learn something from him every time I'm in the woods. Randy was involved early on. He thought it was probably 52 was when he and his dad started walking some of this property. Doc would get the large topo maps, and he'd start coloring in where he could put a lake in. And he actually built 23 lakes down in this area, including Peoga Lake and Ensley Hood Lake and the Conservation Club Lake and some of the others. But and then he got acquainted with Bob Huffam because the Huffams had owned about 500 acres for years, and they wouldn't be partners, or they wouldn't sell, but they'd be partners, so they became partners. And some of the other areas like Pitcher Drive, that was George and Marie Pitcher, they wouldn't sell, but they'd be partners. So basically all the lots along Pitcher Drive, as they sold, the money was split between the Lambs and the Pitchers. And then Dick LaGrange, who was an attorney out of Franklin, owned land up Indian Creek, about where it's silted in. He owned land that they were going to back water back up on, so they got a conservation easement on that, or a drainage easement on it. And so any land that the water got backed up on, then they shared the value of those properties. Randy was around early on with his dad walking all this property and was involved as a teenager in driving the heavy equipment that was brought in to put the lake in. And so I asked him if he would kind of give you, and he's a good storyteller, if he'd give you a little bit of information about what it was like before the water went in. So Randy, if you, and I guess Marv, you want him down here, right? He speaks very well, he's been a teacher for years.
Well, I had quite an epiphany just a few minutes ago when I was called, first of all, honorable, and then secondly, when my brother-in-law spoke well of me. So, it's a pleasure to be here, and I've awakened several times thinking about what I would say today. Thinking back about Lamb Lake, my first encounter was 52, 53, when Dad loaded me up in the old Buick, and we drove over to who knows where, and it turned out it's an old county road that is closed. If you follow it, it comes out at the top of Cement Hill, or at least that's what I remember it called. And we parked the car at the road and walked and walked and walked some more. And of course, the 6, 7-year-old, it seems like you walk forever. And we come up to this big hill, and we look across, and over here in the far distance was this, it looked like a perfect stereotypic Tennessee hillbilly, the whole deal. This old clapboard house that the last time I'd seen any whitewash was probably 50 years before. And we stood there, and Dad yelled across the whole family. I mean, hey! What's going on? This doesn't seem right. And he says, "This is Doc Lamb." And the guy goes back, "Come on in." And that's the way you greeted people. You didn't just walk up and say hi. And so we walked down this hill across, and we came up to this house. And it was your old wood house. It had a great big front porch on it, on posts about 3 feet, 4 feet off the ground in the front. And there was a collection of chickens and hogs and dogs and I don't know what all else underneath it. And they flung this old door open. This guy comes out, again, bib overalls, no shirt, one strap hook. The only thing he lacked was a tall pointed hat, you always see, But he came out and was, "Hi, Doc!" I mean, he's just that way. And of course, I'm looking around just amazed because here comes chickens out of the house. And, this wasn't anything I was used to. And so they came out from all these animals just walking around. It just kind of bare dirt like a chicken yard would normally be. And this was Charlie Calvin Hopper. The house was about to the south of the base of Earlham Dam on the east side where it is now. And I'm just this little guy, so the deck came to about here on me. So I'm looking up. And then he hollers for his wife to come out. And she comes out and is this kind of large woman. Have to be careful not to be chauvinistic here, but anyway, and she just had on the old typical sack dress, might have been made out of feed bags for all I know. And she came out, she was barefoot, she's standing there on the deck. "Hi, Doc." They introduced me. And they had their conversation, and Dad was approaching them about purchasing Calvin Hopper. But the thing that I remember, and I went back home, and my mother says, "What do you think? Did you have fun?" I said, "The dog toenail lady." And she said, what's wrong with my son, What's going on here? The thing that impressed me most of that whole trip was that when Charlie's wife came out and stood on the edge of the deck with her toes there, she had let her toenails grow so long that they had curled down, and to a little guy, it looked just like a dog's toenail. And I'm going, holy gosh, So that was one of my reflections. The other is, as I looked at Lamb Lake just the other day, it looks about the same it did in 1950, except there's a bunch of water there, and a whole bunch of houses there, and paved roads, and an awful lot of people. At that time, it was a small bottom ran up through there, and on the side was briars, brambles, and if you ever coon hunted it at night, they always found you. And it was a thicket the whole way through, grapevines, the whole works. Just untamed southern Indiana in the hills. Now it's a glorious place, to say the least. And I credit that to two men. I get kind of emotional about this. One, my dad, and the other, Bob Huffam. Because as a little guy, I'd also sit in our dining room. They had a great big table there. And they'd roll out these big topo maps. And Bob would come after his naval reserve meetings. He'd still be in his khaki Navy uniform. What was his rank? I don't remember.
Lieutenant J.G.
Okay, Lieutenant J.G. But he had the fun hat, flat hat. And of course, I was a baby boomer, so I was impressed by uniforms. But they'd come and they'd start looking over this map. I'd sit there looking on, I didn't really know what it was all about. And they'd take a colored pencil and start coloring in an area, and they'd use different colors. And they said, we need to work on this, you know. So they started this planning early on and really worked at getting the whole drainage. Now, in addition to that, there was a plan for Upper Callan Holler to build Earlham Lake. And Bob Huffman was a math teacher at Broad Ripple. And it just so happened Broad Ripple had a transit. And unfortunately, they also had the grade pole, because Bob somehow got to use the transit. But Randy got to have the corn knife in one hand and that damn 8-foot pole in the other hand. As I cut my way through all these multiflora rows and briars and grapevines and everything, and he'd holler if he couldn't see me, and then I had to raise the pole or lower it, you know. And he'd take a grade shot, and then we'd move on. We finally took a grade shot all the way down through from the very end of Earlham up to where the dam was going to be, to get an idea of how high the dam would need to be to back the water up that far. Everybody thinks you make a lake to dig a hole. And in fact, you don't. Beavers taught us how to do this. You go to the low end of a stream, you block it, and the water backs up. And that's exactly what Lamb Lake Dam is, Earlham Lake Dam is, all these different. You just go to the low end and back it up. So we went down through there, and then I thought, oh, thank goodness we're done. Then we had to start shooting where the water line would come around the banks. So Bob was on the transit yelling, and Randy was out here chopping stuff with an old corn knife again until they could get these grades to figure out where to put in Earlham Dam. And Earlham Dam was put in about 63, 64, I believe, if I remember. And I worked on that, and I was real good. I was free help. That was part of it. I was the only boy, so I was free help. So I was out there cutting brush, and stacking brush, and trying to clear the bottoms and all. And when I was about 9 years old, they found out that it didn't take a brain to run a bulldozer to push another tractor while it's loading. So they put me on that if I wasn't cutting brush. And I'd push and back up. Well, to 8, 9-year-old, that's pretty cool, you know. Great big thing, pull this lever and move it forward and backwards. So they did that, and we built Earlham Lake, and it filled fairly rapidly. Interestingly, the Corps of Engineers, the experts, said it would take 2 years for Big Lamb to fill. Can't tell you how wrong they were. And there are lots and lots of stories about building the dam. I worked on the whole thing. The keyway to that dam, just not to go too far off, but the keyway to that dam we dug with tourniquets. Big earth-moving scrapers. Actually, part of the tourniquets we used are parked on the edge of Brock's yard, right at the county line. What's his first name? Can't think. Ronnie Brock, yeah. Ronnie Brock has 3 of those. They used to sit up on Pitcher Drive, and they took them from there, and he has them along his banks. But we actually went down in, scooped up dirt all the way across that valley, and usually when you put in a keyway is your dam foot's here, and it goes down to block any seepage underneath. And usually you dig that with an excavator, 6 feet wide, something like that. The poles were 10 feet wide. And we dug it about 2.5 or 3 pulls wide, all the way down to shale or hardpan, which would not let anything pass. And we'd go down there and load up the dirt and go up here and dump it in a pile. Go down, load it. We did that for weeks. And then one day they said, okay, put it all back. So we went up, picked up the dirt up there and brought it down in, kept packing it back, and then we went out at the foot of the dam and started up. But we did lots of things. We also, where the old red barn used to be, some of you probably don't know, there was a red barn there at one time at the boat ramp. It got hit by lightning. In fact, Bob Stoling had some unbelievable pictures of it actually burning. His house was right across, and he just happened to see this, and they had these pictures of the thing, and it just went up like an inferno. But we used that barn to raise cattle, and we also raised tomatoes. That whole big bottom area, where the big turn is, and all, was all tomatoes. Now, we raised tomatoes for Red Gold, which was at that time in Trafalgar, Indiana, Kenny Ryder's Red Gold plant. You picked those by hand. Of course, today they got machines come through and pick them all. So my spring meant I was going to be planting tomatoes, and my summer meant I was going to be picking tomatoes. And we picked them by the hamper and load them on a truck, and then we'd haul them into Trafalgar and dump them off. And just tomatoes after tomatoes. And the worst part was, you knew when tomatoes were done, and they were Rutgers. That was the old Rutgers tomato, a real good canning tomato, high acid. Now they've gone to a lot of aromas and things, but they were Rutgers at that time. But my problem was, I knew, okay, we'll be done with tomatoes here soon because they get dry and they kind of drop off in August. That was when the sweet corn that went all the way down and all the way up to into Callan Holler had to be picked for American Beauty in Columbus. And that was all hand-picked. So you'd walk down 2 rows, middle of summer, had to have sleeves tied at your ankle, wrists, gloves, hat, everything. Because corn, walking through corn just cuts you up if you're not careful. And you'd snap 2 ears and throw them over in the wagon. Snap 2 ears and throw them over, and just walk this whole long row. And when you got to the other end, you'd turn around and come the other way. So we farmed that for a number of years, and it didn't hurt my feelings to see it go underwater, truthfully. And so that was that. Now, as far as how we got into the property at Lamb Lake, and I'll let you guys go on with your meeting, there were only 3 entrances into that whole big area, really, at that time. One was right at the bottom of Taylor Hill. I call it Bob Taylor used to live up in that big red house. It has a beautiful big wisteria vine on the tree in the spring. Maybe you've ever seen that. The tree's dead, but there's a huge wisteria vine there. And that whole tree, just if it's a nice spring, turns absolutely purple. It's beautiful. Anyway, you go down that hill, it makes a little jog through the bridge, and then starts up the next hill. Right there's a little house. And that's the Esselborns live there now, but it used to be called the Watermelon House because apparently the guy lived there right in that next little field, grew watermelons, and people go there to get watermelons. And you turn and go in there and go back along the edge of this bank, ford the creek, and then there was a little access road. Taylor had a field right there. So you ford that creek and you drive the access road back to about the base of the dam. And then from there, the branches from Callan Holler on up the other way came down this way and merged into a creek right by that shale bluff. And so you'd either have to ford the creek and go up Callan Holler, or the creek actually stayed more to the south side where the kind of shale bluffs are and go along there. And so we farmed all that on that side. And that's where you go in and you could go, and it was all just mud. So when it rained, there were places, I had an old, I drove my mom's old 55 Ford station wagon. And there were places where, because the truck's going in and out, you'd get a good run at it so that the car would slide to the other side because the tires wouldn't be touching anything except water and mud. And hope that you got through, or you'd have to go get somebody to pull you on out, get on through there in the spring when it's rainy and all. There's also a county road, which I think they finally got closed, I don't know. But it's on up, it's on past Low Drive and all. And you go on up and there's a little road goes down and it comes out at the top of Cement Hill and then goes on over to roaming around. That was another entrance. And then the other was over through Kenny Watson's, which is where the Red Barn is. Leonard and Ken Watson. And those were the only 3 entrances. There were some old county roads, but you got to remember back in the 50s, there was no such thing as a paved road. When you left 135, it was gravel. All those roads were gravel. And if it was just a road that only 1 or 2 people lived back, it was not a maintained gravel. It was good luck. And so most of the roads were good luck as you went back through that whole area. But it's obviously changed and made a wonderful, wonderful addition. And I got all kinds of stories I can tell you later, but you guys got things to do today, so we'll call it that, okay? Nice talking to you.